The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the webinar series. My name is Mike Fitch with the Ohio LTAP Center here at ODOT, and we appreciate your participation. As we get started, please take a moment to locate the questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. During the presentation today, please use the questions box to send in any questions you might have. With that, we will go ahead and turn things over to Catherine and Lee. Hello.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
So I will start us off today. And the Ohio Department of Transportation is delighted to welcome you to part 2 of this 2-part training on creating a Vision Zero action plan. Today's session will last an hour and a half. At the close of the training, you will receive a copy of the slides that we are using today at the email you registered for with this training. You will also receive a certificate of completion for the 2 sessions at that same email address. All right, your presenters for today will be the same dynamic duo as last week. My name is Lee Reese, and I'm a Senior Transportation Planner and Engineer with Burton Planning Services. And I'm joined by Catherine Jervis, Principal Planner at Tool Design Group. Our course goals for this webinar are a continuation of the goals from last week. And upon completion of this course, you will have the knowledge and skills needed to create the Vision Zero action plan to address crash fatalities in your community. Last week, we covered the first 2 items and part of the third that's shown on the screen here. So if you missed that session and would like more information about crash trends, traffic safety fundamentals, and different programs that address crash fatalities, we encourage you to go back and listen to that session. We also talked about Vision Zero's goals, and while we'll cover that briefly today, last week provided a more complete picture. Today, we will focus on Vision Zero components and steps. So that includes being able to identify main Vision Zero components and being able to identify Vision Zero implementation steps. You will also possess practical knowledge of how to implement a Vision Zero program, understanding the implementation steps, policies, and action plan elements, possess the tools and knowledge to formulate and map out how the implementation steps can be achieved in your specific local community. And number 5, be familiar with the relevant resources, which includes recalling the different funding sources that can be used for Vision Zero and traffic safety projects, and explain how to obtain such funding, and describe the resources available to help with implementation of the Vision Zero program. Before we jump into today's agenda, I did want to follow up on one question from the Part 1 webinar. We had an attendee ask us to expand on how speed studies have changed to improve safety for vulnerable road users. And so as of July 2021, the presence of vulnerable road users is a factor for speed safety studies in Ohio. Specifically, high levels of vulnerable road users allows for the results of a speed study to use the 50th percentile speed instead of the 85th percentile in developed areas. This is based on the US Limit 2 system developed by the FHWA. And you can see the speed zones on local roadway section of ODOT's website for more information. And that link will be, as part of the slides that you receive at the end, that'll be a live link. I also wanted to reemphasize something that we mentioned last time, that an ECAPS training is on the way. And so that will also give you some additional training on tools that are useful for Vision Zero analysis. Now, on to today's agenda. We're going to start by talking about Vision Zero basics, focused on the core elements of a Vision Zero plan. Then we'll move on to Vision Zero implementation, which will cover obtaining a high-level commitment, creating the action plan, and funding opportunities for implementation. Following that, we'll talk through a case study and end with Q&A time. For the first few sections of the presentation today, I will hand things off to Catherine. So Catherine, on to you.
And I'm gonna back this slide up and turn on my screen. Apologies for that, folks. Okay. And there's my camera. All right. Okay, so We're going to do a quick review of Vision Zero basics and then delve more deeply into the 10 components of Vision Zero. But before we do that, I want to briefly mention the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. It's often referred to as SS4A. It's a funding stream from the Federal Highway Administration, and I imagine it's one that people are familiar with and has folks really interested in Vision Zero planning. This funding helps communities write safety action plans with a focus on eliminating fatalities and serious injuries and on implementing those plans. A Vision Zero is a safety action plan with a focus on eliminating fatalities and serious injuries. So it could be a funding stream to get assistance in writing your Vision Zero action plan. I want to share a quote from the Federal Highway Administration's most recent funding announcement. Quote, "These funds will help tackle the preventable crisis of deaths on the nation's roads through safer people, roads, and vehicles, appropriate vehicle speeds, and improved post-crash care." This first of its kind program was created by the President's infrastructure law and is part of more than $14 billion in the law is dedicated to roadway safety. So the map you see on this slide represents the communities who received funding in the first round announced last year in February of 2023, which included 473 communities who received planning grants and 37 communities who received project implementation grants. Through 3 announcements in 2023, Safe Streets and Road for All grants have provided $1.7 billion in direct funding to over 1,000 local communities. Combined, these will improve roadway safety planning for around 70% of the nation's populations. Communities can apply directly to the FHWA for funding to support the development of a comprehensive safety action plan or a Vision Zero plan focused on eliminating fatalities and serious injuries. Safe Streets and Roads for All funding is also available to implement components of your Vision Zero action plan. These are dollars to help communities carry out projects and strategies identified in their safety action plans and Vision Zero plans. In the next section of this presentation, as we explore the core elements for Vision Zero communities, I'll mention items on the Safe Streets and Roads for All self-certification checklist that you'll want to include in your Vision Zero action plan to be eligible if you want to apply for implementation grant funding through the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. So, a quick reminder, Vision Zero is a goal to eliminate all traffic fatalities and severe injuries while increasing safe, healthy, equitable mobility for all. You'll also remember this slide from last week. Vision Zero is an iterative process. We want all road users to responsibly follow the rules, but as system designers, we can take note of where folks fail to comply and take new steps in our design to make it harder to break rules and easier to behave in ways that eliminate fatalities. As system designers, we are responsible for the level of safety in the entire system. Okay, so let's examine the 10 core elements for Vision Zero communities. The Vision Zero network reminds us that these elements help leaders recognize that change the status quo to advance safe mobility for all. These core elements are based on experiences from other US cities who've adopted Vision Zero, and we've also included a useful link on this slide with more detailed information on the core elements from the Vision Zero network for later reference. As Mike and Lee both mentioned, we'll be sending you a PDF of these slides so that you can hit all the links. I want to give a quick plug for the Vision Zero network. It is an incredible resource hub for people doing this work. If you're new to the idea of focusing safety work on the elimination of fatalities and life-altering injuries, this website is your friend. Okay, so let's get to the core elements. The first core element is a public, high-level, and ongoing commitment from leadership. So, by the way, if you are interested in Safe Streets and Roads for All implementation dollars, this is the first item listed on the self-certification eligibility worksheet. So what does it mean, a public, high-level, and ongoing commitment? This means your highest-ranking local officials, depending on what your jurisdiction is, that might be a mayor, village council members, a city manager, county commissioners, your highest-ranking local officials make an official public commitment to a Vision Zero goal to achieve 0 traffic fatalities and severe injuries among all road users. That includes people walking, biking, using transit, driving, within a set time frame. So by a specific year. The first core element also expects that jurisdictional leadership will work across the silos, elected officials and transportation professionals, and also public health. Maybe the planning division as it relates to land use, maybe schools, your mayor's budget team, etc. This is a collaborative effort across multiple departments to center human life and health in decisions related to transportation. By the way, this is part of the fourth item on FHWA's self-certification eligibility worksheet to apply for Safe Streets and Roads for All implementation funds. This core element also recognizes that leaders must set the tone and direction for Vision Zero and back up their words of commitment with action, reflected in spending decisions, policies, and practices that prioritize safety. This means a shift in the status quo, prioritizing safety above all else. The second core element is authentic engagement, defined as meaningful and accessible community engagement toward Vision Zero strategy and implementation, with a focus on equity. You'll remember from last week's slides that some demographic populations of people are more likely to be killed in traffic-related crashes than others. This is especially true in neighborhoods that bear the brunt of high injury streets and where community members may be grappling with the results of historic underinvestment in safe mobility, as well as a multitude of other interrelated systemic inequities. Input from these folks help you and the other folks writing your plan more fully understand the conditions leading to fatalities. Input throughout the process from these folks can help your planning avoid recommendations that lead to unintended consequences. By the way, this is part of the fifth item listed in FHWA's self-certification eligibility worksheet to apply for implementation funding. Okay, let's move to the third core element. That one prioritizes strategic planning. It understands the usefulness of developing, approving, and using a Vision Zero action plan to guide implementation. By the way, having a strategic plan is the ninth item listed in FHWA's self-certification eligibility worksheet to apply for implementation funding. You want a plan that includes explicit goals and measurable strategies with clear timelines and identifies responsible stakeholders for those strategies. By the way, this is part of item 8 in FHWA's self-certification eligibility worksheet. You want a plan, and the plan and its strategies are built on a safe system approach, which recognizes that people will make mistakes and that it is the responsibility of system designers and policymakers to set practices and policies to lessen the severity of crashes. The fourth core element has to do with project delivery, specifically that decision makers provide leadership on policy reforms needed to prioritize safety. By the way, this is item 6 listed on FHWA's self-certification eligibility worksheet to apply for implementation funding. System designers are supported by city leaders to advance safety projects, Here we're talking about leadership across agencies, prioritizing safety via collaborative working group and other resource sharing efforts. This actually is from part of both items 2 and 4 listed in FHWA's self-certification eligibility worksheet. And project delivery, system designers and decision makers advance cross-cutting measures to reduce car dependence, improve transit, and support safe walking and biking. I was in a webinar recently where the presenter said something that was really helpful to me in this regard. They said, when we make it more attractive to travel without people feeling like they have to be in a single occupancy motor vehicle, we remove kinetic energy from the transportation system. And removing kinetic energy from the transportation system reduces impact force in the system. So creating a transportation system that is safe and inviting for people to travel without having to own a car actually increases safety for all travelers. All right, let's move to item 5. The 5th core element is complete streets for all. So for people unfamiliar with complete streets, it's focused on creating a well-connected transportation network for people using all modes of transportation and integrating this concept into community-wide plans and project implementation encourages safe travel. Multimodal street design and countermeasures prioritize safety over speed. In our careers, we've often been encouraged to prioritize throughput. This core element is demanding a shift in our design priorities. The good news is that shift is already happening in many funding agencies, both federal and state funding priorities. And ODOT has an incredible resource to help us make this shift in the multimodal design guide, which we talked a little bit about last week. If you are unfamiliar with ODOT's multimodal design guide, there are webinars and opportunities to bring folks to your community to do training to use the multimodal design guide. But if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend it. This core element also says that safety improvements to roadways are prioritized for people walking and biking, and that safety improvements are prioritized in historically underserved communities. An equitable approach will include steps such as identifying underserved communities through data and engagement, including representation of people from those communities in the plan and implementation process, and collaborating with appropriate partners to conduct an equity analysis. By the way, this is part of the 5th item listed on FHWA's self-certification eligibility worksheet to apply for SS4A implementation funds. The 6th core element is about context-appropriate speeds. So this means travel speeds are set and managed to achieve safe conditions for the specific roadway context and to protect all roadway users, particularly those most at risk in crashes. Proven speed management policies and practices are prioritized to reach this goal, which is part of the 6th item listed in FHWA's self-certification eligibility worksheet if you are interested in applying for implementation funding. This also means roadways are designed or redesigned to prioritize safety over speed, and that speed limits are lowered where data and a community experience show need. The 7th core element is about equity. Equity-focused analysis and programs. This means a commitment is made to an equitable approach and outcomes, including prioritizing engagement and investments in traditionally underserved communities and adopting equitable traffic enforcement practices. By the way, this is part of the 5th and 6th items listed on FHWA's self-certification eligibility worksheet. This core element also centers an explicit commitment and actions to prevent Vision Zero recommendations from increasing disproportionate enforcement levels in communities of colors. The 8th core element is about systemic proactive planning. A proactive system-based approach to safety is used to identify and address top risk factors and mitigate potential crashes and crash severity. Data is used to identify trends of problems which are addressed systemically rather than as isolated incidents. By the way, this is part of the third item listed in FHWA's self-certification eligibility worksheet to apply for implementation funding. The ninth core element is about responsive hotspot planning. A map of the community's fatal and serious injury crash locations should be developed, regularly updated, and used to guide priority actions and funding. This also means top risk factors and locations of serious traffic crashes are identified, mapped, and utilized, and that quality data on traffic deaths and serious injuries are posted publicly and updated regularly. This is part of items 3, 7, and 8 in FHWA's self-certification eligibility worksheet to apply for Safe Streets and Roads for All implementation funding. And the 10th core element is about comprehensive evaluation and adjustments. This means that routine evaluation of the performance of all safety information is made public and shared with decision makers to inform priorities, budgets, and updates to your Vision Zero action plan. That regular progress reports are produced and shared publicly, and the use of pilot implementation and community feedback shapes your safety efforts. For anyone following along on the self-certification checklist, this is the 8th item listed on FHWA's self-certification eligibility worksheet to apply for Safe Streets and Roads for All implementation funding. If I haven't made it clear yet, these 10 elements will position you well to apply for implementation dollars. So incorporating these core elements into your plan really serves you well. So let's do a little activity. Which of these are core elements of a Vision Zero action plan? A, the mayor of Pleasantville hosts a press conference where she commits to eliminating all traffic-related deaths by 2037. B, installing crossing improvements for a 4-lane uncontrolled crossing after a pedestrian fatality. C, installing crossing improvements at multiple intersections across 4-lane roads, even those without a crash history. D, gathering a team, including engineering, street maintenance, data, and communications within 24 hours of a traffic fatality for a forensic analysis and to consider quick build opportunities. Or E, all of the above are core elements of a Vision Zero action plan. And the answer is E. All of the above are examples of core elements of a Vision Zero action plan. Mike, do we have any questions in the chat?
Hi, Catherine. Congratulations to Ashley. She responded with answer E. So
Yay!
thanks for that. At the moment, we do not see any additional questions, but as a reminder for our audience, please feel free to type in questions at any time.
Okay, so let's move on to dive into implementation, specifically the Vision Zero commitment and the Vision Zero action plan. And we'll look at some resources that can help you fund the strategies in your community's plan. So we'll start with the Vision Zero commitment. I talked about this a few minutes ago in slide 13. This is where your highest ranking local official, mayor, council, city manager, county commissioners, whatever jurisdiction you're working in, your highest ranking public official calls a press conference and makes an official public commitment to eliminating roadway fatalities by a given year. It could be done in a state of the city address, but some sort of public announcement that includes a commitment to zero traffic fatalities and serious injuries and a specific date that the city is reaching to reach that goal by. This includes people walking, biking, using transit, riding scooters, driving. And again, that set time frame by a certain year is also important. Setting an explicit timeline for Vision Zero underscores the urgency of the issue. It provides measurability and it incorporates the fundamental safe system principle that these traffic tragedies are preventable. It also makes it clear that this is a priority in your community. The commitment can be a short one-page resolution followed by a longer detailed policy adopted by your jurisdiction's legislative body. I've included a link to model resolution language from the nonprofit organization Change Lab Solutions. The purpose of the resolution is to establish a local government's commitment to Vision Zero as a goal and ensure that a local government uses an equity framework and equity-driven community engagement when considering new safety policies related to traffic speeds and enforcement. The model resolution that I've shared with you commits a jurisdiction to the following actions: actively working to eliminate traffic deaths and serious injuries on that jurisdiction's streets within a specified time period, collecting and analyzing and using data to understand trends and potential disproportionate effects of traffic deaths on specific populations, the creation of a Vision Zero task force or advisory group to develop and implement an action plan that is guided by community input, prioritizing the safety of pedestrians, bicyclists, transit riders, scooter riders, and people with disabilities over the ease of use of personal automobiles, and prioritizing strategies that benefit the safety of communities in historically underinvested areas, and ensuring that no strategy results in racial profiling or otherwise exacerbates racial inequities. We've talked about the 10 core components of Vision Zero communities, so let's look at how those play out in an actual Vision Zero action plan. You'll remember this from the core elements, that stakeholder and community engagement is key to a successful Vision Zero communities and therefore to the writing of your Vision Zero action plan. It's important to remember the process of engagement is really important. This is not about checking a box. Authentic community engagement is about treating people with respect and really listening to their input and allowing it to influence what you decide and what you do. It includes engaging sincerely and with cultural competence, recognizing and respecting the history, culture and expertise of local communities. It includes collaborating with community members who are genuinely engaged in neighborhoods and who have strong connections with and respect of members of the community. These leaders are likely to convey the experiences, hopes, and concerns of longtime residents in ways that historical planning processes haven't. Using this collaboration to inform project design and implementation, not just as a listening exercise, and recognizing that if you're working with leaders, if you don't already have established relationships, the coordination they're doing is work for which community groups deserve compensation to support time commitments, expertise, and long-term engagement. Be particularly thoughtful about engaging vulnerable roadway users, people who have experience traveling in your community without a car. They have a really good perspective on what's happening. Engagement should include both private sector and community groups, as well as those outside of your jurisdiction who will play a role in implementing the recommendations. And you'll remember that having a committee, task force, or implementation group and robust engagement that's incorporated into the plan are items on FHWA's self-certification checklist for if you're applying for implementation dollars. Equity is another foundational item of the Vision Zero communities and therefore should be foundational in your Vision Zero action plan. Equity is a desired outcome of Vision Zero. It's integral to every component of successful Vision Zero planning and implementation. The equity element aims to prioritize safety improvements in areas that have historically been underserved. It also aims to build robust engagement strategies to reach those who are most vulnerable on the roadways and who have not typically been included in previous planning process. An equity analysis is part of the equity element and listed in FHWA's Safe Streets and Roads for All self-certification checklist. And there are all sorts of resources to help you create an equity analysis. And equity impact assessments may look different for each community, but a good place to start is comparing your crash analysis or high injury network to the following federal mapping tools. ODOT has the Safe Streets and Roads for All underserved community census tracts for historically disadvantaged communities. Federal Environmental Protection Agency has the Environmental Justice Screening and Mapping Tool. FHWA has HEP GIS maps of socioeconomics and equity analysis. I actually checked this link earlier today and it was broken, but it looks like it's connected to something else. So I've left this link in. If it remains broken, if you Google this, it will take you to HEP GIS, which is FHWA's Office of Planning, Environment, and Realty's platform for exploring web-based applications, maps, and data that support its various programs, and you can follow it from there. It's broken at that site too, so I'm sure somebody's going to fix that soon. And then the Center for Disease Control has a social vulnerability index. Okay.
Hey, Catherine?
Yeah.
I just wanted to chime in here. We've had two questions that jump a little bit back, but I think would be good to just address. And they're sort of related. The first one is from David. What are strategies for determining a target year for zero deaths? And how is a realistic year determined? And then another question from Scott was, can
you give me one first, and then you can tell me what Scott's question is.
Yeah, sure.
So there are a variety of ways to do that, but you don't. It's not a great idea to just pick a number out of the air. You want to look at what's actually happening. You want to use your data, both your historical crash data, which will help you create your high injury network, and your systemic safety analysis, which will create your high risk network. And those are the roads where you haven't seen a fatality, but it's correlated in a way that those are places where you might see a fatality. And so you want to be proactive and get out in front. One of the really good pieces of news is this systemic data analysis. When you run it, you'll see that a really small percentage of your roads is likely the location of the majority of your fatalities. And so you'll want to get a sense of, okay, what kind of real estate, how many miles do we need to address here? And then be realistic about, like, how much time is it going to take to do that? How much time is it going to take given your current resources? How do you build that into your current planning efforts, including, like, what kind of time is it going to take to change policies and projects and just your ways of doing business, and what kind of opportunities exist for external funding. So thinking about those things together are really going to help you determine what your target year is. And it's probably going to help your elected official feel more confident about putting that out there as a goal. I hope that answers your question. And what's the next one?
Yeah, so on a similar line, Scott asked, can you give an example of a significant reduction target?
A significant reduction target?
Yeah, I think under the Vision Zero commitment, there was either a target date for reaching zero or set one or more targets to achieve significant declines by a specific date.
You know, Jeremy, you might be helpful here. I have not encouraged communities to focus on that reduction target and instead to focus on what's it going to take to get to zero. In our current paradigm, it reminds me of an old Steve Martin joke. It sounds like, pass me that piano. Like, I understand what each of the individual words mean, but put together, that just sounds crazy. And I think that's how it feels to many of us, this idea that we could have zero fatalities. Like, it has been normalized that fatalities are just a normal part of doing business, but it's not true. Like, we've been sold a bill of goods. Like, other communities have figured out how to do it. It really is about prioritizing. It's really about prioritizing safety over everything else. And that's culture shift work. And I worry that doing this incrementally misses the culture shift component that is really what transportation professionals need to be able to do this work well. I'm wondering if anybody from ODOT has thoughts about that you want to chime in on.
And we have the questions box open.
And if not, I'll keep going. And Scott, we'll see if when we get to Q&A, if other people have thoughts that are different than mine.
Hey, Catherine.
Yeah. Oh, hey, Jeremy.
It's Jeremy. Sorry, I wasn't able to unmute, but I have permissions now.
It's fine.
No, I fully agree. The focusing on like that quantitative reduction number isn't the point of Vision Zero at all. I mean, just anecdotally, I've seen as low as 2% year over year, as high as 10% year over year. It's really just like what fits you, what fits your community, size of the community matters. But that culture shift that Catherine talked about, I mean, that's what we are trying to base our whole statewide program around, and that's what we would encourage through these more localized Vision Zero action plans.
You know, the other thing I think about, like, if you're just just to position yourself well for funding, like, this is what ODOT is looking at, this is what the feds are looking at, and I wonder if a community that hasn't fully committed to this culture shift idea doesn't hurt themselves in a funding application, doesn't make themselves less competitive. So even from that perspective, I would caution against that. We're going to do 2% a year or 10% a year. Like, give yourself a bold goal and really work it. Not just for funding, but like really imagine working it and what it will take to get there. I think that's what it's going to take. That's what it's taken in the communities that have figured it out already, both abroad and in the US. They've been just really deliberate about that. And it's helped shift the culture. Okay, let me keep going here. And please keep asking questions. We're delighted to answer them throughout the project. I mean, throughout the slides. Okay, so let's talk about data. Vision Zero requires a robust, data-driven approach. So make sure you have somebody on your team that's comfortable with data analysis and can find patterns in the data. When and where are fatal crashes happening? A deep look at contributing factors. I'm working on a plan with a community right now, and our data analyst just has been able to identify relationships. Like in one part of the community, we're seeing fatalities happening during evening commute, which kind of screams that if people are able to get at speeds that result in a fatality during evening commute, you probably have overbuilt roads. Like that is asking for to look at road diets there. And so somebody who can really look deeply into the data to see where things are happening and when they're happening can really help you think about then how to address those. And then the other part of the data is really looking at the demographic information about who's being killed. Like we have a long history as a profession of being leveraged to support systemic inequity. And we have a huge opportunity now to not allow ourselves to be leveraged in that way anymore. Some of the slides from last time, like the number 2 killer of our children is traffic fatalities. So thinking about, the who and the where and the why can really help direct us toward the what. So really looking at the data and thinking about the data is incredibly helpful, and identifies locations where investments in safety are most urgent and are going to be most productive. Conduct a systemic analysis that tells you where crashes may happen based on similar corridor types, land use, and latent demand. ODOT has this great tool on TIMS that can help you with that, can help you identify where the latent demand is on the TIMS site. So allow these analyses and your equity analysis to guide your infrastructure implementation strategy, and definitely your other program and policy strategies. Okay, roadway design is probably the thing that most of the people in this room it's one of the most important factors in influencing vehicle speed and therefore safety. And like, we're the people who can influence that through roadway design. To plan a transportation system that makes slower, safe speeds the norm, removing kinetic energy from the transportation system increases mode choice for travelers. It protects our most vulnerable road users who may not have the choice to travel by single occupancy vehicle because they're too old, or maybe because they're too young, or maybe they're older and they don't have the ability to drive anymore, or people with disabilities. And these are residents of our communities that are, we need to be involved, who want to be involved in community life. We need them to be involved in community life. And so thinking about people's ability to travel in a variety of modes, especially in those areas with historic patterns of fatalities and serious injuries. So some recommended strategies include investing in capital safety treatments in high injury areas and prioritizing improvements in communities of concern. Those are the communities that have experienced historic disinvestment. While waiting to fund those large capital improvements, you can consider low-cost near-term safety treatments such as painted corner sidewalk extensions and paint and post-protected bike lanes. Another recommended actionable strategy is to identify intersections, corridors, and areas through systemic analysis where severe crashes are more likely to occur based on characteristics of the built environment to proactively prioritize interventions and prevent future serious crashes. Creating a rapid response protocol and delivery timelines for safety improvements when a serious crash does occur. This includes a rapid on-the-ground assessment of the crash scene and immediate implementation for short-term or pilot interventions. And don't underestimate employing policies, including complete streets and transit first in all projects to increase safety for all modes and to boost the number of trips by walking, bicycling, scootering, transit. Remember, more people moving by these modes and fewer moving in motor vehicles are going to boost safety in the entire system. Okay, focusing on speed management. So in addition to roadway design, employing specific strategies to reduce speed for the sake of safety. Most important is designing or redesigning roadways for safe intended speeds. Design roadways for safe intended speeds that are context appropriate using proven countermeasures. A few recommendations of actionable strategies include prioritize designing streets to reduce vehicle speed in the high injury network first. When you conduct your data analysis, you'll find that a relatively small percentage of the local road network contributes to the majority of severe and fatal crashes. Reducing speeds on these roads through proven design measures will bring some of the biggest benefits. Lowering speed limits to fit context. In communities where there's a mix of people walking, biking, driving, and taking transit, speeds are generally more appropriate in the 20 to 25 mile an hour range, and particularly in areas with schools, senior centers, parks, and transit centers. The Vision Zero planning process offers an opportunity to evaluate existing plans as well as policies, guidelines, and standards. Consider what could be added or revised to prioritize safety. This could include evaluating how your jurisdiction approaches street repaving so that future repaving projects can include street redesigns to improve safety. You could also look at development guidelines so that new development projects can contribute to fixing existing safety deficiencies. You may have a recommendation about land use policies that makes it affordable for transit to reach employment centers by discouraging sprawl. Remember, evaluating current policies, plans, guidelines, and/or standards is one of the items on the Safe Streets and Roads for All self-certification eligibility worksheet. And then setting measurable goals with clear timelines for implementation. Clear, measurable, short, and midterm goals combined with timelines and identified responsible agencies will create a framework that's easier to evaluate and fund, and will build buy-in, accountability, and transparency throughout the implementation process. Your Vision Zero action plan should include near-term and long-term goals. This will ensure that your action plan is more than just a 1 to 2 year list of priorities, but truly a long-term strategy to eliminate all traffic fatalities and severe injuries while increasing safe, healthy, equitable mobility for all. If you don't have a list of projects as part of your action plan, one of your actions should be identifying projects. Eligibility for Safe Streets for All funding, implementation funding, includes identifying a comprehensive set of projects and strategies to address safety. A foundational element to success in Vision Zero implementation is to be accountable. So prioritize shared responsibility among system designers and policymakers to design and operate safe systems for transportation. Define clear ownership of action plan strategies to achieve long-term establishment of Vision Zero principles and outcomes. And you want to ensure transparency in your Vision Zero plan for the key stakeholders and the general public. Be clear with your stakeholders and the community what your process is for establishing baseline data. Involve them in creating the action plan. Demonstrate how you'll assess progress toward the goal of zero traffic-related deaths and share those results. Make your plan easily accessible online. So for, I've talked a lot about the Safe Streets and Roads for All self-certification eligibility worksheet. This is what the cover of it looks like. I strongly recommend using this as a guide to make sure that your Vision Zero plan qualifies not just for the current implementation funding, but for future implementation funding. So speaking of funding, I'm gonna, if there aren't any other questions? Are there any other questions in what I've gone over so far?
Hi, Catherine. Not so far. Thank you.
Okay. Then I'm going to turn the mic back over to Lee to talk about funding and resources.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. When we're talking about funding and resources, and Catherine, I think you're,
Oops.
yeah. There we go. When we talk about funding and resources in Vision Zero planning, there aren't really any grants out there right now that are specifically termed Vision Zero grants, but there are a variety of related traffic safety, active transportation, and other similar funding sources that can help you implement Vision Zero projects, some of which we've started to hear about already. And if we can go to the next slide, there we go. All right. So that means we're looking at, oh, sorry, one before, Catherine. I might have been a little bit of a lag on my end. So that means we're looking at everything from federal sources to local sources and other sources that you may not always consider, such as foundations, nonprofits, and public-private partnerships. A great starting point is available in the Active Transportation Plan Development Guide, which includes a table listing primary active transportation funds in Ohio. There's also an FHWA resource on funding opportunities that you might find useful. Links to both of these resources will be available in the slides when you receive them, as you can see here. Beyond the federal and state funding, the local sources of funding would include tax increment financing or TIF, bonds, and your capital improvement programs. There would also be foundations and nonprofit sources, and public-private partnerships may be a possibility. For example, if there's businesses in your community that might be interested. And so there's some national foundations and nonprofits that are listed there. There are also maybe local ones, perhaps for example, there have been a number of projects on painted crosswalks or other sort of innovative projects that utilize local nonprofits. Next, I want to talk about the ODOT HSIP, Highway Safety Improvement Program. ODOT dedicates about $183 million annually for engineering improvements at severe crash locations or locations with the potential for severe crashes, one of the largest state investments in the nation. This funding is available to ODOT staff and local governments, and it can be used to make improvements on any public roadway. In addition to highways, ODOT works with state and local organizations to make investments that improve safety on all public roads. To meet these goals, ODOT made the following changes. There are now abbreviated applications as an option. So the criteria for submitting applications was changed to give priority to locations with higher severity of crashes or the potential for these crashes. Locations must have a minimum of 3 crashes per year, and projects must be $500,000 or less for those abbreviated applications. Funding is available for construction only and must be completed within 2 years. These applications are reviewed once every quarter. On the formal application side, in September 2021, the minimum thresholds and scoring criteria were changed. The minimum threshold for submitting a safety application will be 3 crashes per year, with 30% of the crashes involving a fatality or injury. Projects with higher severity will get more points, and projects addressing crash frequency and congestion, but lower severity, will receive fewer points. ODOT will set target amounts for funding awarded each application cycle. The amount will be announced in advance of each round and based on available funding. ODOT will also expand opportunities for communities with fewer financial resources. Projects in communities with higher levels of poverty can receive up to 10 points toward the project score. These communities may also be eligible for a reduced local match. In January 2022, ODOT accepted project applications that focused on preventing pedestrian and roadway departure crashes through systemic infrastructure improvements. These are 2 crash types linked to high severity crashes, specifically in Ohio. Systemic safety improvements are meant to be proactive, as we've talked about, and widely implemented based on roadway features that have been associated with specific crash types. FHWA has identified a range of proven safety countermeasures that prevent these crashes, and ODOT wants to encourage widespread implementation of these safety improvements. Project sponsors can request up to $2 million for pedestrian and $5 million for roadway departure safety improvements. The one source that we've been talking about a fair amount today is the Safe Streets and Roads for All, or SS4A source. As Catherine mentioned, it's for $5 billion over 5 years that was established as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And as of December 2023, over $1.7 billion has been awarded. The SS4A program funds regional, local, and tribal initiatives through grants to prevent roadway deaths and serious injuries. The SS4A grants can fund your Vision Zero action plan or associated activities. So there are 2 types of grants under the SS4A. There's the action plan grant, and then there's also number 2, there's the implementation grant. And those action plan grants can also be essentially your Vision Zero plan. Communities can use those action plan grants to develop or complete an action plan or to conduct supplemental planning activities. Then on the implementation grant side, there's a variety of example activities that includes applying low-cost roadway safety treatments, identifying and correcting common risks, transforming a roadway corridor, installing pedestrian safety improvements and closing network gaps, and working with community members in an identified problem area. And the list goes on to include things like deploying advanced transportation technologies, combating roadway departure crashes, improving first responder services, and even more from there. So Catherine has talked a bit about the self-certification worksheet. To be eligible for SS4A grant funding, there's a variety of items that your action plan needs to include. This is on the self-certification worksheet. There's some of these that are rated as essentially required, and others that are a bit more of a menu. But your action plan really needs to include a public commitment to Vision Zero by an official or a governing body, that target date to reach zero or a target for decline, establishing a task force or an implementation group, existing conditions analysis, the crash location analysis, number 6 there, the analysis of systemic and specific safety needs. Then there's public engagement and the use of feedback in that plan. Furthermore, there's inter and intra-governmental collaboration, equity in the planning and in equity analysis itself, an assessment of current policies, plans, and guidelines, implementation through adoption of new policies and guidelines, a comprehensive set of projects and strategies to address safety issues, including time ranges and prioritization, measure progress within that, documented within the plan, a public posting of the action plan, and then last is the plan being adopted within the last 5 years to get that implementation funding. And so really for more information on kind of how that all works together, you can see that self-certification eligibility worksheet on the SS4A website through the FHWA. Just to clarify who is eligible to apply for these SS4A grants, it covers metropolitan planning organizations, counties, cities, towns, and transit agencies or other special districts that are subdivisions of a state, federally recognized tribal governments, and multi-jurisdictional groups comprised of the above entities. To apply, visit the SS4A grants webpage. There you will find a how to apply section with a webinar and resources page, frequently asked questions, and a link to the application. The next round of applications is expected to open in February 2024, which is right around the corner. And this year is the third year of the 5-year grant program. We're going to give you, along with the slides, a list of resources here. So some additional resources that might interest you include application aids for the SS4A program, the FHWA's Office of Safety for pedestrian bikes, such as the pedestrian and bike safety page, PedSafe, the FHWA's pedestrian and bicycle safety information search tool, the FHWA's How to Develop a Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Action Plan, and the Dangerous by Design report by Smart Growth America, which was also referenced somewhat in our previous presentation. Along with those resources, there are other resources listed here, including the Road to Zero, a vision for achieving zero roadway deaths by 2050 from the RAND Corporation for the National Safety Council, ODOT Highway Safety, the ODOT Walk Bike Ohio report and associated resources, the Towards Zero Deaths and Vision Zero networks that we talked about before, Road to Zero, and the American Planning Association Surface Transportation Policy Guide, which includes sections on traffic safety and Vision Zero. Now, before we wrap up, we would like to share a case study for what it looks like to implement Vision Zero. And the specific example we'd like to share is for the city of Boston. If you're thinking why pick Boston as a case study, you can consider this kind of context. Columbus has more people than Boston in the city proper. The city of Boston has about as many square miles as the city of Cleveland. They're a great example because their Vision Zero program started early, comparatively speaking. They're focused on fixing really universal issues at intersections and of speeding. And best of all, they've seen a measurable decrease in fatalities and injuries. The city adopted Vision Zero at a high level in 2015 and released its first action plan in 2016, which you can see on the left here. They recently reconfirmed their commitment to Vision Zero with an updated 2023 action plan. The 2023 action plan carries forward 4 key areas of action. First, that's on accountability and transparency. Second, a laser focus on reducing speeds and building safer streets. Third, in an acknowledgement that more than half of the people killed while bicycling were struck by larger vehicles, the city has committed to taking action advocating for changes to the design of larger vehicles. And finally, that the city will continue to engage with residents on Vision Zero. So this slide and the next one that should be showing up highlights important milestones from the City of Boston's Vision Zero initiative. One of the most important early changes was the reduction of the citywide speed limit. Enabled by changes in state law, the city implemented a new citywide speed limit of 25 miles per hour in 2017. The change was accompanied by a marketing campaign and extensive use of speed feedback signs. In the next 5 years, we see that more new laws were passed to support Vision Zero, including restrictions on the use of mobile devices while driving and a minimum passing distance law. And then in the past year, the city has made commitments to significantly expand their bike network and traffic calming program, the latter of which I'll be touching on later in this case study. The city has adopted an approach that is both reactive and proactive, as similar to what we've been discussing. In response to fatal crashes, the city has collaborated with stakeholders, conducted site investigations, and made design changes. One example is the intersection of Washington and Blue Ledge in the city's Rosendale neighborhood, which you can see here. Here, a person crossing the street on foot was struck and killed in a marked crosswalk. As part of the Vision Zero Rapid Response Program, the city installed an improved crossing with flexible delineators and rapid flashing beacons. It also featured narrowed travel lanes, a crossing island, and daylighting at corners. Post-installation data showed significantly increased yielding rates, a 10 to 20% reduction in vehicle speeds, depending on the time of day, and no injury crashes recorded as of mid-2023. Through projects like this, the city developed a standard toolkit for safer crossings that is deployed at locations throughout the city. The city has also undertaken major redesigns of key high injury corridors. One of the key early action projects of the city's Vision Zero program was Mass Ave. This high volume arterial is a key bike route where people on bikes can exceed 15% of total traffic on the street. Prior to Vision Zero, the street has standard bike lanes, which you can see here on this photograph. Under the Vision Zero program, the city undertook a redesign using a toolbox of signs and markings, flex posts, and timing changes to create a protected bike lane, leading pedestrian intervals, and turning protection for people on foot. And then as sections are reconstructed, the tactical improvements Boston has a complex data landscape, and to identify corridors of higher risk, the city uses a combination of crash data from the city police department and public health data from emergency services. The high crash network is a synthesis of that data and is used to guide safety investments. The city has identified networks for each mode, as well as identifying those corridors that have high risk for more than one mode. At a high level, the bike and pedestrian high crash networks, shown here in orange and yellow, are concentrated closer to downtown towards the north end. And while the motor vehicle high crash network, shown in blue, is concentrated in the neighborhoods in the southern half of the city, away from downtown. There are also numerous routes on the high crash network for full modes, shown here in black and sort of concentrated at the border between those two areas. Under the framework of Vision Zero, the city developed its first neighborhood-wide traffic calming program in 2016. In spring 2023, the city announced a safety surge. In addition to a commitment to redesigning 25 intersections a year and implement new signal timing guidelines, the city is planning a significant expansion of its neighborhood speed hump and area-wide traffic calming program. The black and gray areas on this map show completed and in-progress projects, and the blue neighborhoods are planned for implementation over the next 3 years, from 2024 to 2026. Another one of its focused investments is for the city to be looking at corridors of greatest risk. Roads with 4 or more travel lanes are consistent safety problems and continue to be a focus. One of the city's current projects is a redesign of Center Street in the West Roxbury neighborhood. And you can see here that several of the statistics that the city has identified along their 4+ lane roads, such as pedestrians making up a large proportion of high crash network locations, then those 4+ lane roads being more likely to appear on the high crash network than other roads, and they have a higher average number of severe crashes per mile than other roads. In an unfortunate but familiar story, crash analysis for the corridor reveals that specifically for Center Street, that the disproportionate burden of injury is borne by people on foot and on bike, with pedestrians particularly vulnerable while crossing the street along this neighborhood shopping corridor. So in response, here we see on top the existing 4-lane cross-section with the proposed new cross-section on the bottom. And you'll notice on the bottom that they've changed to a center turn lane as well as adding buffered bicycle lanes on the side. And implementation of these design changes started in the fall of 2023 and is well underway. Taking a step back, we can look at high-level trends. So this graph shows the number of people killed by mode over the past 12 years in Boston. We see an increase in the years prior to the adoption of Vision Zero, and then a decline in the years after Vision Zero is officially adopted there in 2016. And then an uptick during the COVID-19 health emergency, a trend that unfortunately a lot of communities are familiar with. As the relatively low number of fatalities can limit the identification of clear trends, we can also look at a 3-year rolling average of injury crashes, not just fatalities, where we see a steady decline. While these results indicate progress, the city is committed to the hard work necessary to get to zero. And it's perhaps worth noting here that the motorist line in black is divided by 10, so there is some scaling here to kind of bring everything together on one graph. For more information, you can visit these City of Boston websites, which will also be available with links when you receive a copy of the slides. As a sort of summary of what Boston is looking at, here's what they're focusing on in terms of their projects. So it's 40 to 50 miles of streets, roughly equivalent to 500 speed humps installed annually. They're looking at 25 to 30 quick-build intersection improvements with improvements such as daylighting and bicycle lane separation. There's also signal phasing being implemented citywide as signals are upgraded or retimed. One reason their program is worth highlighting is that it focuses on making small changes at pinpoint locations, but at scale across the city. It took them time to build out, it took some time to build out a program this robust. Vision Zero Boston has been active now for 7 years and has a team of full-time staff. And I want to connect this back to Ohio communities. So like Boston, we all have problematic intersections and corridors. There are plenty of different ways to start and see an impact. There are speed table programs in a few cities such as Cleveland, Akron, and Cincinnati. There's a hardened center line program in Cincinnati as well. There's a quick build program in Toledo that has 6 pilots planned for this year. And the downtown Columbus speed limit has been capped at 25 miles per hour. And so what you can think about is that compared to cities in Ohio, Boston is a few years ahead, but that we can and should still celebrate our progress in the past few years across Ohio City. And so I want to also emphasize that Vision Zero planning and concepts apply for all communities, including rural and suburban areas. And the recent ODOT HSIP changes, which include systemic safety funding for roadway departure and pedestrian improvements, are a great example of what can be done even outside of larger cities, since both crash types can be an easy entry point into other Vision Zero themes. In suburban areas, there are real opportunities along roads, such as commercial corridors and in places with highway-centric development. Both the Vision Zero Network and FHWA have highlighted examples of suburban Vision Zero planning, and that will be in several of those resource links. And I've personally helped with a Vision Zero plan update in Fremont, California, where their work echoes themes from the Boston case study by starting with quick build projects and installing more permanent projects as funds allow, and that's much more of a suburban area compared to some of the cities we've been talking about. I also want to emphasize that there are also an increasing number of examples of rural and suburban areas going through the Vision Zero planning process. So we hope that you'll be able to connect with each other and be resources for each other, and that you can also look for peer communities and regions in Ohio and elsewhere. So we are going to do a little bit of course wrap up and talking about some key takeaways and next steps, and then get to the Q&A. So as part of to wrap up this course, here are a handful of thoughts to take away with you to focus on key messages and for your Vision Zero action plan implementation. Traffic crashes affect everyone, and they are increasing. Traffic fatalities are preventable. Addressing traffic safety, especially crash fatalities, can be accomplished at the local level. And focusing on severity and specific crash types and safety improvements will help us reduce fatalities and serious injuries. So with that, we encourage you to create your create your Vision Zero action plan, utilize funding and resources of information and to help guide and pay for your efforts. And with that, we really thank you for your time today, and we will look forward to any of your questions.
Yes, thanks, Lee. We do have a question from Dylan, and I've copied the question into the chat section.
And Dylan's question is, what are the best means for marrying congestion mitigation strategies with safe system strategies? Are actions like traffic signal optimization, which maximizes throughput, jeopardizing vulnerable road users? Lee, do you want to take first crack at that?
Yeah, I think that the framework that we're trying to present here is focused more on the safety side of things. And so thinking about traffic signal optimization as sort of the example that you gave here, I think that traffic signal retiming is something to consider, but particularly as you're doing any kind of retiming like that, thinking about how can we add features such as leading pedestrian intervals. And so I think the idea of marrying the congestion mitigation with the safe system strategies, it should be really focusing more on that safe system strategies, perhaps above the congestion mitigation, but to the extent that you can have congestion mitigation, that's sort of a nice side benefit, is how I think I would consider the answer there. But I don't know if you have additional thoughts, Catherine.
Well, it does occur to me that one of the things we're seeing as we're starting to look at some of the communities that have had success and look at communities where we see slower traffic speeds already, where people have a variety of modes they can choose from in a way that they feel comfortable and safe traveling in that way, that creating a transportation system that people can safely and enjoyably navigate without having to own a car is an element of traffic mitigation. And so thinking about how we center that in our thoughts, rather than continuing to build things further apart from one another, which require longer distance traveling, which makes people feel like they need to speed to get through their day.
Yeah, and I think the other idea I would add in is that, in a lot of cases, by trying to focus more explicitly on increasing travel speeds, often the people will then kind of go back to using, or think that cars are then the more convenient option, and sort of take away a lot of that benefit through potentially induced demand. Often that's capacity increasing, but in some sense, congestion mitigation is capacity increasing. And so you have to weigh whether that the goals will ultimately be realized by focusing on that congestion mitigation side, without also making travel safer for all of the people who are currently out there today, not necessarily in their cars.
I think of this particularly in rural communities that I work in, and I've spent quite a bit of time in rural Ohio. And when we design transportation systems that focus on people traveling through a place, whether it's through a village or a neighborhood, or not on the people who are living in that place, we are not serving our residents well. I've been in many communities where you could easily and more pleasantly and probably more quickly walk from origination to destination, but because of roads that induce speed that travel through those communities, people feel like they have to get in a car and then park someplace that's not at the door, when a door-to-door walk might serve them better, but we're serving people that are traveling through. So I think we really have to shift the mindset of transportation as part of a quality of life, and really understanding that fatalities are not a necessary condition of a transportation network, and thinking about what we have to do to remove speed and kinetic energy from our transportation system.
All right,
Mike,
thanks.
are there any other questions you're seeing?
Thanks, Catherine. At the moment, no additional questions. We'd like to invite our audience to type in any questions they might have. While we're waiting for other questions, Jeremy with our ODOT safety section, if you're still online, if there's any information you'd like to share, feel free.
Thanks, Mike. I'll just reiterate some of the funding opportunities that Lee mentioned. Our abbreviated program, I really want to advertise that one. That's the best way to get these quick build improvements, things like temporary curb bump outs, speed cushions, raised crossings, a lot of those traffic calming features that can be very localized along corridors. It's a very easy program. The threshold is low. We're willing to kind of bypass that 3 crash per year threshold if it's on what we deem a higher risk facility, or if you're willing to implement some of these traffic calming features that we don't see super frequently around the state yet. So definitely want to advertise that, leverage that program to the best of your abilities.
All right, very good. Thank you, Jeremy. In the questions box, Seth says, "Thank you, great presentation." So we appreciate that, Seth. Thank you so much. With no additional questions at this time, Lee and Catherine, any final comments?
If other questions arise, your slides will include this link to reach out to Amelia Mansfield at Burton Planning, who'd be happy to follow up with you. We'll be sending you this deck following the presentation, so you'll have all the great links that we shared in the presentation. And happy planning. This is really good work, and I really I appreciate your commitment. You know, there have been a lot of you in these 2 meetings, and it's really good to see people excited about really going after this big, bold goal of eliminating fatalities throughout the state. So thanks so much for the good work you're doing in communities all over the state.
I think I just would echo that. Thank you all. Thank you all for your time. And yeah, if you reach out with any questions, Catherine and I would be happy to provide you additional information that if something comes up.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Catherine and Lee, for presenting today. We really appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for your participation. Have a great day.